Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's rap session. I am your host, Ebony. I appreciate everybody that's out there watching. If you can, share it to your page. Also, please put your questions and comments in the chat box, and I hope to be able to answer any questions. But I want to talk to you guys about a subject, and this is really sort of hard for me to talk about. It's hard for me to talk about because I grew up with my grandfather, who was a farmer, and I used to hear about things from him, and I used to look at him, and I used to say, "Granddaddy, it's not that way anymore. Things are different now." And I said that as a child, and I could never really understand where he was coming from, and some things I knew what he was talking about, but today I'm going to be talking with you about schools reopening and the subliminal messages that are being sent to our nation, really. But I'm going to talk about some national things as it pertains to schools reopening, and also going to be talking about some local things, okay, that we need to be paying attention to. So let me say this again. In my mind, there is no question about whether schools should reopen. They should definitely reopen. It's not if, it's how should schools reopen. All right. So basically, with the governor's announcement, how schools should reopen, it basically mirrors exactly what the president wants us to do. So here are some facts. Black and Hispanic people are disproportionately affected by the coronavirus for various reasons, such as underlying health conditions. And guys, I know some of you already know this, but let's just go through the facts so we can just put everything down. Various underlying health conditions which stem from financial reasons, which prevents purchase of quality foods, being overworked and paid less, and lack of access to health care. Much of the Black community do not want to send their children in a face-to-face setting for those very reasons. You have a lot of grandparents raising grandkids, and they can't be put in danger of the children bringing the disease back home, okay? So not much communication, I don't think it's been with the Hispanic community, as we're only getting some representation from them recently. But don't get me wrong, poor white people are also being affected in the exact same way. Lack of access to healthcare, underpaid, and also lack of being able to just get access to the things that they need. So because not communication has been made, some of the deeper rooted issues have, I believe, been being ignored. There have been signs that scream, separate the Black, the brown, and the poor from the other kids. So it's important to understand the Jim Crow laws and its history. So before I go into this, and guys, my shows aren't that long, but let's just go over what the Jim Crow laws were and how they came about. So basically, after the North and the South had a civil war, the South wanted to keep their slaves, and the North, of course, did not. So when the South lost, okay, then the president at the time, Lincoln, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Basically, what happened was they had to provide services to all Americans, but everybody wasn't in agreement with that. So what happened was, as a joke, what we now know as the Ku Klux Klan, they dressed up and they showed up to scare Black people. But what happened was, what started off as a joke, they kept doing it, and they formed this organization. And over time, over 20,000 Black people were murdered. They were killed by what's now called the Ku Klux Klan. So what happened was, to stop this from happening, they developed something called the Jim Crow laws, that were to separate the Black and the white so that there wouldn't be any intermingling, so that there would be less violence. That's basically why they did that. So, guys, this basically is a narrative that sounds really familiar with what's going on right now. So the murders, so we fast forwarding to now in 2020. So the killings and murders of many Black people were brought to the attention by the media and broadcasted around the world, which is sort of similar to how people were killed back during, after the Civil War by the Ku Klux Klan. So then protests, sort of like the Civil War, broke out in the streets of America this year because of that. So now to add injury in the light of all the protesting, okay, for social equality, now they bring up this idea for 2 ways to open school, and that's either virtual or face-to-face. That seems like a good idea in the beginning, but when you really start thinking about it, basically what the president has proposed. So let's go to Betsy DeVos. Okay, she's the Secretary of Education who doesn't have any school-age kids. She also has no experience in education. She stated 3 years ago, guys, that she thought that it was a good idea for people to be separated. Now, this happened 3 years ago, so I could not have made that up. So I want you to hear what this other broadcast had to say about DeVos. Listen at this.
This week, Donald Trump met with leaders from the historically Black colleges and universities. And while he was meeting with those African-American leaders, Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, sent out a press release praising the HBCU, saying that there's such a great example of school choice and how successful it can be in the United States. What DeVos may not realize is that these historically Black colleges and universities were essentially formed, founded, and gained prosperity during the era in the United States under Jim Crow segregation laws, because that was the only choice that African Americans who wanted to go to college had. They couldn't go to regular state universities because those were for whites only. That's not choice, Betsy. That's oppression. And in fact, when a Black woman did attempt to go to the University of Mississippi under segregation, when she made that choice, 20,000 members of the National Guard had to be deployed to the state of Mississippi. That's not choice. Again, that's oppression. Perhaps if Donald Trump had picked somebody to run our education policy in the United States that has higher than a 4th grade achievement level, maybe she would have understood that. This is pathetic, and it is frightening coming from the woman who is literally in charge of education in the United States. To somehow frame these Black colleges and universities as beacons of choice, knowing she had to have known that they gained prosperity because they were the only choice that Black people in the United States had to go to college or a university before 1960 without getting hosed down or having dogs sicked on them or having National Guard members come in to block the friggin' doors. Did she forget about that part in history? Did she forget?
Guys, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat box. I want to hear what you guys have to say about this. So basically what DeVos is saying is that she's okay with segregation. And she said that over 3 years ago. So that's really important to note that she already had that mindset. So now, okay, we have the pandemic going on. So the president, to add to all of this, the president has all the COVID tests routed directly to the White House through HHS, who happens to be owned by one of his buddies. Okay, so by the time we open schools back up September the 8th, how do we know that the numbers are even real when they bypass quality control through the CDC? How do we really know that that's what the numbers are? And I think that's another method of control of the narrative, just like how it's been control of the narrative the whole time before. So again, two options, face-to-face and virtual. It stated that face-to-face, it was stated, face-to-face gives more optimal experience for the child. I agree with that. So then it was also stated that virtual gives a good quality level of education. So I want you to analyze that. So optimal versus good level of quality, that's something to note. So guys, this is how face-to-face is going, how virtual learning is going to look, just so nobody's confused with how that looks. One teacher will not be teaching the classroom while there's a live feed. What happens is they're actually creating two separate schools within each school district. That means that the teachers that are teaching face-to-face will not be teaching virtual. That means if there's a English teacher and let's say honors English, for example, they're going to have, I don't know how they're going to do this by September the 8th, but an honors teacher for English and another teacher for English. So that means basically within one school district, there are two schools. So what happens is as things get better, if a parent chooses to go virtual for safety and health reasons, when they're ready to come to regular face-to-face school, that child will have to integrate back into face-to-face school. Now I want you to even think about the word integrate and how that sounds, that your child has to learn from home, and then when it's safe, parents that are following health protocols, they're having to integrate back into school. I mean, and that itself is a blow to a child, them having to learn a new teacher. If they're having to come back in the middle of a school year, they're having to learn to adjust back to face-to-face. So this can cause stress. Now think about this. Back during Jim Crow times, it's a two-way street. It's a two-way street for not only the Black and brown students, but also for the white students. You know, we always think about what the Black students, that they had people jumping on them, but you have to understand on the flip end, that was learned behavior, even from those kids. So giving two options doesn't mean equal. So basically what's being said is that virtual learning will not give all the same things as, of course, face-to-face, and that's understandable. So at this point that I know of, no enrichment is going on for virtual teachers. If they have a shortage of teachers for regular school, who are they going to be getting to teach virtual schools? Are they going to be just as educated or highly skilled as the face-to-face teachers? So what does that mean for kids that want to learn from home? Does that mean? I don't know. That's the question, because I don't think that they will be able to get somebody who teaches on the same level as face-to-face. So here's something else I want to share with you real quick, guys. We're getting to it. Jim Crow laws, although they were abolished back in the 1930s, its effects are still around today. And it's been around for so long, sometimes we don't even realize how it's still affecting us. But listen to this.
And it comes as the spring marks 60 years since the landmark Supreme Court ruling of Brown versus Board of Education, which was intended to end segregation in America's public schools. But an explosive new report finds school integration never fully occurred, and in recent decades may have even been reversed. The resegregation of America's schools is the latest in an ongoing series by ProPublica called Segregation Now, Investigating America's Racial Divide. And it focuses on 3 generations in the same family in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
The report concludes that, quote, while segregation as it is practiced today may be different than it was 60 years ago, it's no less pernicious in Tuscaloosa and elsewhere. It involves the removal and isolation of poor Black and Latino students, in particular from everyone else. In Tuscaloosa today, nearly 1 in 3 Black students attends a school that looks as if Brown v. Board of Education never happened. Well, for more, we're joined by the author of Segregation Now, the whole series, Nicole Hannah-Jones. She covers civil rights for ProPublica with a focus on segregation and discrimination in housing and schools. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Congratulations on this remarkable series. And coming out now, at the same time that the Supreme Court has backed a ban on race as a factor in college admissions. Before we talk about Tuscaloosa, if you could briefly comment on this idea that race shouldn't matter when you look at the schools of America.
I think it's very obvious if you just look strictly at the facts that we still have a racialized K-12 system, and that Black and brown students tend to be in schools where they're receiving an inferior education. They have a less rigorous curriculum. They're less likely to get access to classes that will help them in college, such as advanced placement, physics, higher level math, and they are most likely to be taught by inexperienced teachers. So when you have this system where Black and brown students are receiving a very different education than white students, and then once you get to the college level, you say race no longer matters, and despite your disadvantage in a public education system, that now everyone should compete at the same level. I think.
Again, everybody, if you have any comments, questions, put them in the comment section. We could feature your comment or question on tonight's show. So again, its effect still exists today, and it's exacerbated by, and it intensifies, it's basically like adding fuel to the fire by segregating kids from face-to-face and virtual, okay? So basically, the solution to this is to allow all kids virtual so that the teachers who are already qualified to teach can teach virtual. Because you have to also think now that these teachers, a lot of them still already have students that they have at home. What if they don't want their child to come? They should have that option and that right also. And nobody's thinking about the teachers who are having to teach in the environment. So when it's safe, all kids can transition and not some having to integrate back into face-to-face school. So notice that we use the word transition and not integrate, okay? So you can't ignore that race doesn't play a part in the decision, that's the decisions that are being made. I understand that the decision whether children should go face-to-face is going to be different depending on what county a person is in. But keep in mind, in South Carolina, all but one county is in a high risk right now. So it also it plays on a child's psyche to have to integrate back into regular school versus in face-to-face, there's not really even a plan that I know of. I know they're creating a plan, but it hasn't been put out there about how it's going to even be done. I don't know about the logistics for face masks. And keep in mind, those face masks have to be replaced every single day. All right. This is the recommendations from the healthcare professionals that they should not be using the same mask. So how is all that going to work? We don't know those plans. So again, with all the test results going straight to the White House, by the time September 8th comes, we don't know. And to be quite honest with you, I don't know if we can trust the numbers that comes from HHS at this point. The only way I know that we can really gauge what the numbers are to gauge the hospital beds. So if the hospitals are at capacity, that means the triage is at high capacity. And if triage is at high capacity, then that means that if you introduce children into the environment and they get sick, that means automatically society will have a shortage or lack of access to healthcare by default. You have to really think about that. You know, listening to doctors having to triage out in the waiting room. That means that there's no equipment, there's not any privacy, there's not, and also keep in mind now, these numbers that they're looking to project is going to be after 4th of July numbers come in, because those numbers I don't think are submitted yet. It's going to come after Bike Week is underway. They just had a fair. All right. And also something to note, a local doctor, he put out some numbers today. Out of all the counties, Horry County ranks in the top 9 of cases. So with Georgetown County being so close to Horry County, I know that nobody else is naive enough to think that the virus is just going to stay in Horry County. Okay, people are going to be traveling in and out. So just to be clear, I don't think anybody, I hope not, don't think anybody just kind of sat down in our school district and said, hey, we should just segregate the schools again. I don't think that happened. But what I do believe happened is that because the narrative is being controlled from the upper level, I'm talking about from the White House on down, every time they want their way, it's if you don't do what I say do, we're going to defund you, just like how they did the hospitals. If you don't do what we want, we're going to take money away. So hospitals had to conform because people need access to care. They're doing the schools the same exact way. If you don't do what we want, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to fund you. And that's all a level of control. So what the school districts need to understand is that they have that level of control right from where they are. They don't have to, from my understanding now, because I know that there are other counties that are going back only virtual. I know that the state superintendent, it was not in agreement to that. And that is because she's following the guidance of the healthcare professionals and not politicians. This whole health crisis is not a political issue. The schools should not be a political thing in them opening schools back up. It's a simple matter of looking at the numbers and doing what the doctors say do. Also to mention, if children go back, it's sort of like would be sending them back to school in a Category 5 hurricane. Now, if we really had a Category 5 hurricane, do you think they would say, oh, well, we've got a storm, so the people that don't have any daycare, send them to school? Or, it's a hurricane going on, so the parents that want their kids to come to school, let them come on to school. They don't do that. If we had any kind of other disaster, natural disaster going on, all kids stayed home. That's what happens, and that's what needs to happen in this particular situation. So the foundation of this country was basically built on, if you don't do what I want, then this is what's going to happen. I'm going to hurt you, this, that, and the third. That's exactly what they did to the Native Americans. They welcomed people thinking that they would be able to make friends and trade and do business, but instead they lied to them, they killed them, took their land, and brought slaves over to help them build the country. And it's that same learned behavior that's going on right now. So let me repeat this. What's going on right now, part of it is learned behavior and controlling the narrative. So basically, in my opinion, all students need to come back virtual, not only just because it's the safest thing to do. That's number one. That's the safest way for all children to come back. The second reason is because you're able to utilize the teachers that are already qualified to teach to go ahead and teach all students. Now, I understand that broadband is an issue. They are working on that. We can deal with trying to get internet access, but we cannot get a child's life back. All right. So just keep this in mind now. If you have two ways of coming back, that's just a step backwards. It's called retrogress. We will be retrogressing, not progressing. That's what we should, that's what the way that we should be going. So the way that it's going, that it's not going to be equal when you have two ways of learning. All right. It should be an all for one plan. So also keeping in mind that the two options, it's, in my opinion, is also a slap in the face to the Brown versus Board of Education. That was the very thing that they were trying to keep from happening, is for schools to be segregated. And y'all, this didn't happen that long ago. My dad graduated in, I think, 1979 or 1980. My dad still went to a segregated school in the 1970s, even though it had been done away with. He went to Choppy. He was one of the first kids of my grandmother that went to integrated schools. And we're having this talk here, just not even a few years later. So let's move away from policy and let's talk about the straight facts. 1/3 of the COVID cases are between 11 and 30 years old. That means school-age kids and young teachers are being tested positive in our area for COVID-19. Okay. Again, with all these different things coming up, we already know the behavior of people during the holidays. They're going to be touching, they're going to be drinking, they're going to be doing different things. And the numbers are going to pick back up. Whether they report the right numbers or not, the numbers are going to continue to spike. Something that we need to also keep in mind is that there's a study that's being done, y'all. And this is really interesting because some of the symptoms that can come from coronavirus is actually brain damage. So just think about some of the people that said, oh, I got coronavirus and I got better. Long term, some folks are going to get brain damage. So when you think about kids in this state and other places around the country not doing well with standardized testing, can you imagine a small child or middle school, a person in high school getting the coronavirus, they unknowingly suffering from brain damage later on? Then those test scores are really going to start looking bad, y'all. So it's not just a lung disease. People's kidneys are being infected. People's the lungs, the brain, the heart, even all these things. So my whole thing is this: people are also saying, well, the kids are running around doing what they want anyway, but for any child to get sick under the school's watch is a serious, serious offense. So at this point, I just kind of feel like the narrative has been basically outlined again from the top down, because you got the coronavirus task force at the White House was all but dismantled. We just cut ties with the World Health Organizations, bypassing the CDC for the test. And even right here in our counties, the reopening task force have all been but dismantled. So it starts from the top on down. So here's the thing. If they don't make a decision now and make a decision for all kids to do one thing, so everybody's on the same accord, I have seen people take their child out of the school system and they're enrolling them into these online academies. So basically here, to be transparent, I know a lot of people don't know this, the school districts, at least here, they get a little less than $2,500 per child for the school districts. So if people are enrolling their children in online platforms outside of the school district, what do you think that's going to do financially to the school as one parent decides to take children away and put them in these other platforms? That takes money away from the school. So the best way to do it for all is to keep everybody learning on the same platform until it gets better. Nobody's asking for it to stay virtual. Maybe it only needs to be virtual for a little while, and then as things get better, as they even come up with a better plan, to me, they need to come up with a better plan that gives everybody safety, from the teachers to the students to the families. Nobody's really thinking about that. The kids taking the disease back home. I don't think nobody on these school boards are prepared to pay for funerals. These folks on these school boards are not prepared to hold these kids and hug them if their family members get sick. And the thing about it is, it's already happened here in Georgetown. The kids bring it home. It makes somebody sick. Then they die. People have lost their family. And all the ones that I know that have lost family members because children have brought it back home have been African Americans other than one. So when it comes down to the plans, I've seen plans in other school districts, and they are wonderful plans to come back face to face. But let me tell you something. Just because a plan looks good on paper, that does not mean that that's how it's going to work in real life. That's not how it's going to work. So just because you say, yeah, we're going to let the kids put these masks on, we're going to have these dividers, we're going to do this, that, and the third, all that sounds good. But kids are going to be kids. They're going to be touching all on their face. They're going to touch all underneath the desk. Who's going to clean that stuff up after all underneath the desk and things like that when these kids leave and transition from place to place? That's not realistic. And especially with the little ones, even with the high school students, it's going to be hard for them to just sit in one spot all day long. I don't want to sit in one spot all day long. So why do that? Why do that until it's safe for everybody to return? It's all about the human behavior, and the behavior says that I don't care how good a plan you have to return face to face, people are going to be people. And then you have to also understand there's a lot of behavior issues in school. So now we're not even talking about academics. So you got a coronavirus, behavior issues that you have to address, sometimes behavior things that's leached over from the parents, because you have a lot of parents that don't believe in the face mask. So when they talk around their kids. And so here's how the kids are going to pull face masks. That my parents said this whole thing is a hoax. This whole coronavirus thing is a hoax. They're kids that believe that. So they're going to be defiant at school. They're defiant normally. So they're going to be defiant even during the pandemic. None of that changes. So then the last thing I want to show you guys real quick before I close this out is, well, y'all, I can't find it. But it basically just talks about human behavior and how people, what I'm going to leave you with is this. Let's not walk into retrogression. Let's progress together. That's the only way we can really have equality, is if we all do this together, not some doing this and some doing that. In some things, I understand that options are good, but when you're in a pandemic the way that we are, some of those options are just out of the window. Maya Angelou, and I don't know who remembers the Concorde planes. Who remembers the Concorde planes that used to fly? Those planes were the fastest planes at that time. A person could get on that plane in New York and get to London in like 3-4 hours versus those long flights. Well, Maya Angelou flew on the last flight of the Concorde, and she stated that this is actually a step toward retrogression. They let one little accident, I say little, they let one accident keep them from moving forward and progressing. We have to progress, and you can't progress with just some people. So now, what we need to do is really have a serious conversation with ourselves at home about whether it's really ethically right to have 2 ways for schools to open up, knowing well there's not a real plan in place for all students. We don't live up to the standard of education right now. So I don't see how they can have live up to state standards in the various counties with 2 schools within a school district. So I appreciate everybody for watching today. If there's any questions, again, any comments, I love to see them. I'd love to hear them. This topic is really controversial, but it can't go without being said. We need to start calling a spade and not being afraid to say what it is, because that's exactly what it is. The people at the top already believe in segregation, and everybody else is having to follow suit, all because they're saying, if you don't do what we want, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. When in actuality, our school boards have control over how they make this thing here go. So I would personally go to your school's webpage and get their information with the school boards. Because I know personally here with Georgetown County, I think all but one school board member wants people to come back face to face. Think about that. And everybody on that school board, from my knowledge, they don't have any school-age children. They may have children, but they don't have their children to put up as a sacrifice in schools. So just keep in mind, people who are on the board are going to be making decisions for everybody else, and they're not in the same position as we are as parents and as teachers, staff members, and everybody that's involved in the community at large. You have to think about that. When these kids go and sit together, they're just going to go to school and bring it back to the homes. What we need to do is probably close back down for a whole good month and do like the other countries, because we're supposed to be using these other countries as examples, but we're not doing that. I appreciate everybody on tonight. I love you all, and see you later.